Dear friends, I hope you're all doing really well in these difficult times. I thought I would talk to you about something which I find really interesting, and I'd like to start with a personal anecdote, if that's okay. Around three and a half years ago, I went to Prague on holiday with my family. We were there to celebrate my parents' wedding anniversary. And I don't know whether you've ever been to Prague. If you have, you'll know that it is a stunningly beautiful city. And beforehand, I didn't know anything about the Czech Republic or Prague. I didn't know anything about the culture or the historical heritage. But within a very short space of time, I fell head over heels in love with this beautiful country and this beautiful city. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today. Because when we got back from Prague, we went shopping and we were looking for something that we were looking to buy something basically that would remind us of Prague because we were missing Prague. And we came across a DVD called Operation Anthropoid. It's quite a recent film. It's not a Czech film, but it was filmed in Prague. And I was really affected by the film. I was really touched by it. So I did some digging. And the more research I did, the more I realized that the historical event that the film was based on actually really contributed to changing the course of history. And I was really inspired by it. So that's why I wanted to give this speech about this topic. So what was Operation Anthropoid? Well, it was a secret operation in World War II to assassinate SS Obergruppenfuhrer Reinard Heydrich. Heydrich was Hitler's third in command at the time. He was the head of the security services in Nazi Germany, and he acted as de facto leader of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. In 1939, Hitler invaded and took over Czechoslovakia. The takeover was actually accepted by the UK and France because a few years beforehand, the Munich Agreement had been signed, which basically stated that Hitler could invade Czechoslovakia, provided that he didn't declare war. The Allies wanted to avoid a repetition of the horrors of World War I, essentially. Obviously, we know that Hitler broke that promise when he invaded Poland, but at the time, the Munich Agreement was still in force. So Hitler took over Czechoslovakia and he put his third in command, Reinhard Heydrich, in charge. He was a very powerful man. You might know that he was one of the architects of the final solution, and he became protector of Bohemia and Moravia. It was thought that his predecessor had been too lenient. At the time, there had been much resistance to Nazi control. There were sabotages in various companies, and there have been strikes. So Heydrich organized a big crackdown of the Czech resistance. He killed thousands of people, and this earned him the nickname the Butcher of Prague. He murdered anyone who was even suspected of resistance. He murdered Jews, homosexuals, Christians, political opponents. And we can really say that he choked the people of Prague with a blanket of fear. The situation was extremely painful and difficult for the Czech people. Meanwhile, the Czech government was in exile in London, and the Czech government felt that it had to do something to inspire the Czechs and the Slovaks and to show that they were true allies. They wanted to show the UK and France that they were really allies. And the question that was floating around at the time was the following: is Czechoslovakia ready and willing to resist Nazi Germany? And the answer was a very loud yes. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. This is why Operation Anthropoid was put into motion. It was instigated by Frantisek Moravec, the head of the Czechoslovak intelligence services in London, and the Czech president Edvard Beneš and the British Special Operations Executive Director agreed to the operation. Planning started in 1941, and two men were chosen for the task: Jozef Gabcic, who was Slovak, and Jan Kubic, who was Czech. the idea was to choose one man from Slovakia and one man from the Czech Republic to demonstrate the unity of the country. These two men were part of the Czech army in exile, and they had managed to get out of Czechoslovakia just before the takeover. They went through France, and they actually helped the resistance efforts in France. Fast forward to the 28th of December, 1941. At around midnight, these two men and 7 other men were parachuted back into Czechoslovakia with fake identity papers. They were then housed by several different families who belonged to the Czech resistance in Prague. They then met with different contacts from the Czech resistance, and they were actually informed that Heydrich had basically destroyed almost everything that was left of the Czech resistance cell. There were very few people left. So Operation Anthropoid would basically require everyone in the resistance. Preparations started, but resistance leaders actually begged the Czechoslovak government in exile to call off the attack because they feared the consequences and the reprisals. As the head of the Czech resistance said, and I quote, "Hitler would tear Prague apart." And he went on to say that "I fear freedom will be wiped from the map." However, Edvard Beneš, the Czech president in exile, sent a coded telegram back urging them to proceed with the operation. However, there was a spanner in the works at this point because it was discovered through a contact that Heydrich was about to be posted to Paris and that he was on the point of leaving Czechoslovakia for good. So this put them in a now or never situation. At 10:30 a.m. on the 27th of May in 1942, Heydrich started his daily commute to Prague Castle. Jan Kubic and Jozef Gabcic waited at a tram stop at a junction. The idea was that the tight curve would force the car to slow down. So the green open-topped Mercedes reached the curve. It slowed down. Gabcic suddenly dropped his raincoat to reveal a Sten gun, and he pulled the trigger. But to his horror, the gun jammed, and time almost stopped at that point. Heydrich then pulled out his pistol, at which point Kubic threw a grenade under the car. Heydrich did not die, but the bomb did wound him. Kubic managed to get away on a bike, and Gabcic got away on a tram. But what happened after that? Did the operation actually fail? Well, the investigation was opened, and unfortunately, there were horrific reprisals. 13,000 people were arrested. Meanwhile, Kubic and Gabcic, along with all of the other members of the Czech resistance, decided to lay low. They stayed with families, and they later hid in the St. Cyril and Methodius church in Prague. Interestingly, you can actually visit the church in Prague today, and there's actually a little memorial and museum to Operation Anthropoid in the church. It's really fascinating. Anyway, the freedom fighters hid in the church, and a few days later, they actually found out that Heydrich had died in hospital of his injuries. At this point, the Nazis had absolutely no leads. They had no idea who had committed the assassination. They had no clues at all. They offered protection and large sums of money, 1 million Reichsmarks, in exchange for any information. But as I said, they had no leads, and it looked like Kubic and Gabcic were going to be able to walk away from this fine. At that point, however, Karel Curda, who had been part of the Czech army in exile and who had actually been parachuted in to Prague along with Kubic and Gabcic to join the operation, actually went to the Gestapo and he betrayed his colleagues. He gave the names of all the contacts, and he gave information about the safe houses which had sheltered Kubic and Gabcic. The end result was that the Gestapo discovered the church and the Nazis laid siege to the church. They sent in 750 SS soldiers. Then a 2-hour gun battle then ensued, at which point Kubic then died of his injuries. Gabcic and his other colleagues hid in the crypt of the church. The Nazis wanted to take them alive for obvious reasons, so they tried to flood the crypt, at which point Gabcic and the others then shot themselves to avoid being caught, tortured, and having to betray their other colleagues. But all in all, this church battle lasted for 6 hours. So there were around 7 freedom fighters versus 750 SS soldiers. And they held the church for 6 hours, which is really impressive. Now, I said at the start of my speech that this changed history, and you might be thinking at this point that this is really depressing because these brave men died at the end of the day, and they don't seem on the face of it to have been rewarded for their brave actions. However, what later ensued was of paramount importance because as a direct consequence of Operation Anthropoid and the killing of Heydrich, the Munich Agreement was scrapped. So the Allies agreed that Czechoslovakia was a true ally and that it deserved to be protected, and they pledged to defend Czechoslovakia and help it. This directly helped lead to this liberation of Czechoslovakia after the war. In addition to that, Heydrich was the highest ranking Nazi to be killed in the war. Operation Anthropoid was the only successful government-organized assassination of a top-ranking Nazi. But even more importantly than that, Heydrich was due to be posted to France. And as I said at the start of my speech, he was known as the Butcher of Prague for very good reason. So if he had been posted to France, if he had lived, if he had been posted to Paris, who knows what untold horrors he would have committed in France. Finally, and my most important point is actually that because of this resistance, the Nazis actually started to place a lot of troops in Czechoslovakia in order to quell the resistance. They placed so many troops in Czechoslovakia that there were fewer troops on the Eastern Front near Stalingrad, and there were fewer troops on the Western Front. This directly, according to many historians, contributed to the Soviet Union beating Nazi Germany in Stalingrad, and it also contributed to the success of D-Day. So I hope that you found it really interesting, and I'm really sorry for making a hash of all the German and Czech proper names, but I hope you found it interesting, and thank you for listening.